We're now entering my favorite part of this lesson, which is configuring the actual devices. So in this lesson, we're going to connect to a Cisco switch and do some configuration. In order to do that, we need a specific application that can allow us to connect to the switch, and that's called a terminal emulation program. That terminal emulation program can be used to connect in various ways to the switch. For instance, via a COM port. If you're sitting right next to the switch, you might want to use the console port on the switch to configure it. If you would like to do that, you need to select your serial port and configure it to these following default Cisco settings: a baud rate of 9600, data bits of 8, no parity, and 1 stop bit, and flow control. When we log into the Cisco switch, we're going to see a couple different types of prompts. The first one is the host name and a pound sign, and that's called the exec mode. You can't do a lot of configuration there, but you can do different commands to show and see what's going on with the switch. The second configuration mode is a mode we call global configuration mode. This is represented by the host name of the switch and a config followed by a pound sign. The changes made in this mode usually affect the entire switch as a whole. Finally, when we want to go in and modify individual interfaces, we will do that through the interface configuration mode. That mode is signified by the host name of the switch, a config-if, and a pound sign. To get to these different modes, when you start off in exec mode, you would type in config T, or configure terminal. To get to the interface configuration mode, once you are in the config T mode, you would type in the interface that you want to modify: interface space E1/1. I'll show you more of this later on. For now, these are the different steps we're going to run through in our switch configuration. The first thing we're going to do is go through a switch setup procedure. Normally in the switch setup procedure, you set the administrative password first, you go through some other steps, and then you set the management interface address, the switch name, and possibly even a banner message or a message of the day, and that is a message that people see when they initially connect to the switch. That is not part of the initial setup, but I will show you how to do it as a separate item. Finally, we'll take a look at the startup versus the running config and how to save the startup config to the running config, and explore some various show commands. So let's go ahead and start configuring the switch. Here I've opened my terminal emulation program. If I was going to connect via the console port or a serial port, I would go in and choose Quick Connect. I would choose a serial port, and then I would set the settings that we discussed previously: 9600, 8, none, and 1, and then I would click Connect. And because I have already configured my switch, I will be connecting to the IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Connect. Now when I connect to my switch, I've already configured an admin username and password, so I'm going to go ahead and enter that. And as you can see, it puts me into the exec prompt. Now on a switch, if you ever take it out of the box and run through the setup and decide you want to change that setup configuration, you can actually just type setup again. So yes, I do want to enter this. Because I've already created my admin username and password, it's actually asking me if I want to create another login account, which I don't. If I was doing this for the first time, it would ask me for an admin password, make me repeat it twice, and make sure that it met the configuration guidelines for the password. The second thing it asks me is whether or not I want to configure Simple Network Management Protocol. This is a protocol we use to make configuration changes to the switch and gather information from the switch, and I do not want to configure that at this time, so I'm going to say no. Now I need to enter a switch name, and then it'll ask me if I want to configure the management interface, which I do. In this case, I'm going to give it an IP address, in a subnet mask. So it has an IP address configuration. Finally, what I want to do is specify the gateway so that it knows who to talk to when it needs to go out to the network. Now, Telnet service, which is usually the default service that allows us to connect and remotely manage a switch, is disabled by default, and that is because that service is actually unsecure. So I'm going to leave it disabled, and I'm actually going to use SSH, which is a secure protocol that is used on the Nexus by default. So I'm going to say yes. In order to use SSH, and because it's secure and encrypted, I need to create a certificate. Specify the number of bits for the certificate. A network time protocol server is a server in our environment that devices can connect to get the time in the location that you're at. And that way all the different devices are synced up to the same time setting. So when you're reading error logs, those error logs can be synced across multiple devices. In this case, I'm going to say no. Because the Nexus switch has the capability to do both Ethernet and storage protocols, or data and storage protocols, I can actually go in and change the basic fiber channel configurations. Because we're not covering that part of the lesson right now, I'm going to go ahead and say no. Now, after I'm done with this basic setup, it will show me the configuration that's about to be applied. So I can review that. If I need to make changes to that, in this place I would say yes. And I could go back and rerun through the setup script. In this case, I'm happy with my changes, so I'm going to say no. And then my final step is use this configuration and save it. If I'm happy with my configuration, I say yes here, and the configuration is saved to the device. I'm going to say no here because I have actually already configured my device. Now, in regards to some of the show commands that we can see to see what's going on our switch after we've configured it, the first one we might want to do is something called a show version. Now, the show version shows us the software that is running on the device as well as the hardware of the device that we're configuring. The show module command can be used to see what different modules are plugged in to this device. For instance, the Nexus 5548 has an expansion module in it. So when we take a look at the show module, we can see that in module 2 we have an expansion module plugged in there. It's a 16-port unified port module. I also might want to check the configuration that I've just configured. So in that case, I would say show running config. And I could scroll through and see my different configuration. In this case, you can see there's not a ton there. If I want to change to my configure mode, I would type in configure terminal. I am now in my global configuration mode, where I can start to make changes to the device. If I want to configure an individual interface, I will type interface Ethernet 1/1 and press enter. And then you'll see that we're in the configuration for that specific interface. Now, if I ever get lost and am wondering where I am inside of the terminal, I can always just type where. And now I can see that I'm configuring the interface Ethernet 1.1. Now, the nice thing about Nexus is you can actually do show commands from anywhere within the configuration. Previously, with the iOS-based devices, you actually had to go back to your executive prompt. And with Nexus, you can do it from anywhere. So another important command that I might want to see is my show logging. If I do show logging, it's going to show me the entire log. As you can see here, it's very long. I can press Q to exit out of it. But if I just want to see the last 10 messages that were entered in the log, I can do show logging last 10. Now it's just going to show me the last 10 messages for my device. Now finally, the last thing I want to take a look at in our basic switch configuration is the help command. When I'm typing a command, I can do a couple different things. One, I can use the tab key, which I'll use now, to complete the command. And it will try to find the most relevant command to complete your command. In this case, it's shutdown. I want to do a show command. So if I want to know what options are available for my show command, the next thing I can do is a question mark. When I do a question mark, it will come up with every option available for that show command. I can then look through that, pick one, and it's going to return me where I left off. So as you can see, I'm at the show again, and I may want to do a show interface Ethernet 1/1. Now we're going to configure a common configuration option called a banner or message of the day. We use a banner in order to deliver a message to folks as they log in to the device. So in order to configure the banner, I need to go into our global configuration mode, which is configure terminal. From there, I can go ahead and configure my banner by specifying banner MOTD, or message of the day. From that point, I can actually press a question mark, press a space, and then question mark to see how I would configure this command. In this case, I need to specify a delimiting character, which in this time I'm going to put a exclamation point, and then my message. So now that I have my message complete, I'm going to add another exclamation point, and that tells the system that my banner message is done. So you can actually make them quite long. I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and now my banner message has been accepted. So next time when I connect to the device, I'm going to disconnect, reconnect. I will now see my banner message up at the top of the screen as I connect to the device. Those are some of the basic commands that we can do inside of our Nexus switch, and we've walked through the basic setup of the Nexus switch. Please join me for our next lesson with basic port configuration.